Hey everybody, welcome back to Planet Coaster, and welcome back to Apex, the sort of modern, sort of sci-fi, Intamin inverted launch coaster. Now in today's episode I'm going to finish it, so it's gonna be a little bit of a messy episode that's all over the place, with lots of little things all over the park to be finished. And that also means that the time-lapse, to be very honest, isn't quite up to my standards, or at least how I'd like it to be. Usually, I try to pay attention to my camera movement and move the camera as little as possible while recording these time-lapses to prevent the final video from being too nauseating to watch. But in this case, some parts of it are just so all over the place, or the things that I'm building are hard to get together without moving the camera around at least a little bit, that it moves a bit too much, personally. I did cut out some parts, but apologies in any case if this time-lapse isn't quite as still as they would normally be. I'm trying to work on it, but it is what it is. Anyway, this first build that I'm working on is a little cover for this part of the queue, which functions as basically an extra backup queue. It's something that you often see in theme parks, where you have a regular queue that is nicely themed and easy to walk through, but you might also have some cattle pens that act as backup. Sometimes it's a cattle pen that you can just walk on the side of, and on a busy day you have to walk through the whole thing. Sometimes it's a whole separate area that you get moved to when the queue gets too long. This is the latter basically, and I at least wanted to give some sort of cover for it, because realistically, when I visit theme parks I get very annoyed at queues that are completely coverless on rainy days or hot sunny days. And it makes a big difference to at least have something here and there to look at and also to stand under. It's just absolutely grueling to stand in the sun in one cattle pen for hours on end. It happens sometimes. Anyway, it's all the reason why I wanted to build a roof here, and for some reason I just tortured myself with this idea of making a sort of futuristic curvy roof. Again, bringing back the triangle elements from the station. I wanted all of the architecture in this build to just be unpainted, light concrete, and try to emulate the rockwork in all its shapes. So with the station, of course, we have those triangles, which are kind of an abstract distillation of the shapes and the composition of those rocks jutting out in all kinds of directions, and also being quite vertical. And for this cover, I also wanted to do something similar, and I was also a little bit inspired by a building called het Vlinderpaleis in Antwerp, which is a really weird place to look for inspiration for a theme park. Also not the best picture right there, but it's what Wikimedia had. But it's something that I felt would probably fit into the map. And in the end, I am pretty happy with it, but it was just so finicky, absolutely ridiculous, and when I was done, I realized I spent way too much time on this. I also had to cut out some parts there to actually, leave you guys without the footage of me trying to match the other side to this side, because that was a super finicky process. But this is a fun bit, working on this edge here to make the edge smooth. And I guess that is the one thing that's kind of satisfying about this whole process, just the fact that the roof ends up looking pretty clean, especially from above. It's not quite as clean from below, and maybe that's something I shouldn't have mentioned, because now you'll probably notice it. But yeah, it's hard to make a very curvy concrete shape that, in real life would be made out of molds or such, out of these different pieces in Planet Coaster. It's definitely not what the game is made for, but I think that's all the more reason why I wanted to try to do this anyway. So in the end, maybe not the most practical thing, but it was pretty fun to work on. Now that's one part of the cover done. The way I'm gonna cover the rest of this area is just to copy that around, but before I do that, I still have a good view of this area. So I wanted to add the fencing, which I'm going to keep very simple, but at the same time I wanted to go for different fences than what we have in-game, for a bunch of reasons. One thing is that when you do cattle pens like this with the in-game fences, and I understand that this happens, it makes a lot of sense, but you basically get double fences everywhere, which isn't really that realistic. Realistically, you'd only have one fence between paths. And also, I've just seen these fences too much. They're in-game, so my brain automatically kind of sees them as a bit boring. So I decided to go with something that is very similar to the concrete fences on the rest of the queue and the bridge that goes over the coaster. So to at least also give it a little bit of consistency across the map. So now, copying these things around, you can already kind of see that it resembles the rockwork a little bit, I guess, if you have a lot of imagination. And I just wanted to add some extra support beams underneath these things to make it look like they could actually support their own weight, but that's basically it for that section. But then I realized I still wasn't done. For some reason I wanted to torture myself a little bit more and also come up with a way to cover a different part of the queue, because the rest of the queue is completely outdoors, and while the queue is at least relatively fun, I think, you have lots of cool views of the coaster and probably great places to also take pictures and videos, which, you know, if you're like me, you are that annoying person in a queue line when it has good views of a coaster, where I'm constantly holding up the queue because I need to get that one picture. Then again, and this is a huge tangent, but people always get mad at this, and this confuses me because we're standing in the queue line anyway. Like, once we're done walking through this thing, we're gonna have to wait for 30 minutes in the line. It doesn't really matter if I'm gonna stand here for 1 minute and you have to wait here and look at the, you know, still available queue line path in front of me that I'm not walking through yet. It doesn't add extra waiting time, but people just get very mad at this sometimes. It's not like I've gotten into fights or anything, but it is interesting. It always annoys me at least a little bit, because I'm like, it doesn't matter, like, why are you so annoyed at this? I'm not gonna stand here forever. Then again, I also realized that I must be looking like quite a thuzy standing in a queue line taking pictures of a coaster, whereas most people are just walking through there and want to get out of there as soon as possible. Anyway, that's it for the tangent. I took this small roof, made it a little bit larger to try and cover as much of this different little cattle pen as I could. Maybe it's not all quite covered, but hopefully it's good enough to at least give some shade and cover, and also looks similar enough to the station building and the other triangular roof section to at least fit into its environment. And that's basically it for our queue line decorations. But the most important queue line decoration is probably right here at the front before the queue, and that is the sign for the coaster. Now, there's a funny little story around this, I suppose. A few weeks ago, I went on a trip to the UK with a theme park group called Seeking the Thrill, which is basically a place for theme park enthusiasts to meet each other and go on trips and meetups to parks and events and whatnot. And it's something that I've been a part of for a few years, and this year we went to the UK, and I just realized this turned into an advertisement all of a sudden. I have no commercial link to Seeking the Thrill whatsoever, and it's really just a hobby. But in any case, we went to the UK, I was on the Eurostar, and I was a little bit bored, and I figured it's time to draw our logo for Apex, because I need to have a logo. And this is what the logo ended up being, drawn on a Eurostar and now turned into reality in Planet Coaster as soon as I came home from that trip, which was really great, by the way. And yeah, there you have it. There's Apex with a way too big sign at the entrance of the queue line. Now, another thing that I really need to add is some sort of curb or border around my paths, and I could have done this the simple way or just kept the in-game curbs. But for some reason I wanted to torture myself with this as well, so I decided to try my hand at making a custom rockwork curb out of some Theme Maker's Toolkit rock pieces. Now, these rock pieces are great because they're super small, so you can basically make your own shapes and walls and stuff out of it if you want to. In fact, I think you could probably make some good stone walls for foundations of buildings or things like this out of that as well. But in this case, I just wanted to create a simple curb for my path that also fits into the rockwork and the general aesthetic of the coaster. So far everything is pretty colorless, I think, because even these curbs are now just grey rocks. And it is a bit finicky as well sometimes, because these curves on these paths are a little bit random, and also there is elevation differences, making it a little bit harder. Plus, I did want to have a different curb somewhere else, not to make everything too simple. So here's my attempt at making a very simple curb using just stucco pieces, which also works fine, I suppose. There are no fences here, so technically people would be able to get to the coaster, but I'm thinking to myself, this is not a Merlin park, so this is not a kind of theme park where we're too concerned about guests that way. You can probably figure out for yourself that you're not supposed to enter the right area, and we don't have to concern ourselves with 2-meter tall fences to keep people out of the danger zone, if you will. Now, moving on, I also wanted to create a little piece of custom street furniture for this part, and I'm keeping it very simple. I just wanted to have a very simple modern street light. I think it's always these little touches that are very fun to do custom, because it doesn't take a lot of effort, but it means that your build gets some unique charm, I guess. But I'm really keeping this one very simple. The biggest challenge was looking for the light piece that could fit on this thing, because I knew that I wanted to just have a very straightforward lamppost and put a modern light on top of that, but so many of the lights in Planet Coaster are huge or themed or just complicated in all their shapes and colors. So I was looking for a very simple light, and what I eventually ended up settling with, I think might be from the Studios pack, but it's a sort of spotlight in any case, but sunken into the rest of the lamp, it kind of looks like a simple flat LED light, which is the kind of thing that I was looking for. And now I'm just plopping these things all around the paths. To be very honest, it's not my proudest work. This whole path system is just pretty unrealistic and simple. It's just to give the coaster a most basic sense of actually being in a park and having some sort of environment around it. And also creating cool sight lines from which the people can see the coaster, because really what went on in my head when I was figuring out a layout for these paths wasn't so much where should these paths realistically be, but just thinking, I need these sight lines to be in here. You know, there's a certain perspective to look at the station from, there's a certain perspective to look at some of the elements from, and I just wanted to make sure that I had paths over there, and I'll just connect the bits in between. By the way, something that I didn't talk about, but you might see if you're paying close attention, is that I added LED light strips, or at least that's my idea of what they are. Maybe they're also neon, who knows, to the Apex logo on the front there. So at night it should have lit up pretty cool, but even during the day, because you can't turn off these things, it does give the logo a pretty cool shimmer. So I ended up deciding just to keep them in there because it looks pretty cool. And then for the rest of this area, I'm theming it, quote unquote theming, because it's not really theming, in a very similar way as the rest of the coaster, with a bunch of custom foliage, low shrubbery, and lots of rockwork, because I think the rockwork in this case also helps to frame the coaster in general. So with the station, we have the rockwork jutting out in different directions away from the station. We have some elevation differences here, which are always fun to cover up with rockwork as well, and then put some grass on top of it. It's just something that I was really imagining when I was doing this. It's probably going to look pretty cool. And then also the almost Japanese garden-esque custom foliage here and there, some of which is based on Anik Madra's and N7's custom foliage pieces on the Steam Workshop, but some of which I've also pulled from my own Japanese garden build that I did a bunch of years ago, that I made some Japanese bushes for, which are really cool because they're just pruned in such a way that they have these cool round shapes that are almost like a miniature version of a real tree, or a large bonsai if you will. Now, one more thing that I needed to add here is the maintenance shed for the transfer track, which is something that I, to be very honest, shoehorned into this build because I completely forgot about it until the end, and then I realized that this layout is very hard to fit this kind of thing into. So it's now a little bit hidden, but I think that also actually makes sense, and it was a fun challenge to try and figure out what to do with this thing. So in the end, I'm keeping it very simple, close to the station, so you can transfer the trains from the station as well, with a green roof with lots of grass and shrubs on top of it to hide it a little bit more in the environment. And I'm also using the rose vines for this, which are a fantastic piece. One of my weirdest foliage tips in Planet Coaster that always works is that if you're looking for a certain type of bush and you can't find it, but there are flower pieces that kind of match what you're looking for, just recolor those flowers green and you won't see that it has flowers, and you can use that texture to your heart's desire. It's pretty fun to mess around with and also works well for a green roof like this, I think. And then for the side, I'm bringing back some of the elements from the station building, which was easy enough to do and a fun little throwback. Again, bringing back the decals by Furana to add some dirt and texture to the side. And we're also going to add some light strips to this as well, because why not? It makes everything look really cool. So that's eventually something I ended up adding, but I think I didn't end up recording. Anyway, I want to move to... I did record it actually. Anyway, I want to move to the last part of this video, which is a fun little experiment with Pathworks. So, something irked me about this large asphalt/tarmac space over here with no decoration, but at the same time, this was my iconic sightline for the station building, so I didn't really want to do anything with this. So I ended up settling for something which I haven't done in this game in quite a while, making custom pathway decorations. And it's something that always throws me back to the Roller Coaster Tycoon 3 days. Back in those days, we had lots of custom scenery sets, which we would call pathway covers, I think, or path covers, and use those to make all kinds of shapes, because they often made up different triangular sections that you could use to make cool mosaics. And it's something that's a lot of fun to play around with, and if you want to keep your path in a certain place, you don't want to put any decorations or buildings, but you still want to have something cool looking there, I think it's fun to play around with. And in this case especially, I felt like there was no way for the shape of the station to bleed out into this section and to give you a sort of continuous jagged triangular sightline. But doing this with the path was a very fun way to bring that back into this area. So I'm kind of making it seem, or at least that was my goal, like all of those triangles from the station are spilling out over the bridge onto this main pathway here, and doing that with a bunch of different stucco items in different shades of grey. And it's really a bit like doodling. I didn't think of any of this beforehand, I just knew that I wanted to make it look like this general idea of triangles spilling onto the path here, and yeah, it just becomes a game of placing stucco pieces after that, and also trying to work with the heights of the paths, because as you can see, terraforming sometimes throws a bolt in the wrenches or a wrench in the gears or whatever people say they do, which gets a little bit annoying to work with every now and then. I also had this weird idea here that maybe I could use these glitches to my advantage, but it ended up just being too glitchy, so I undid all of that. And another challenge in this is that you want your pieces to overlap and stuff like that to get different interesting shapes, but at the same time everything needs to be as flat as possible, because you kind of want it to look like they're concrete pieces that have been creatively put into the Pathworks. So it's something that's a little bit delicate and requires a bunch of trial and error, and as you can probably see by the length of this part of the time-lapse, it took quite a bit of time, but in the end I think it's all worth it, and it creates a pretty cool visual, not just from above but also on the ground if you're standing at the edge of it and you're looking at the station in the distance, those rockworks on the sides and those masses of triangular geometric shapes on the floor. I think it's all part of the experiment here. Anyway, that's it for this build, and I quickly want to show you guys what it looks like in real life before we conclude this episode. So let's jump into the game. Alright, so here we are in game, and I shrunk myself down to guest size so we can walk around the park a little bit before I show you the aerial overview. And here's the view of the station from what is actually the exit path. I also very last minute added some safety nets because I did realize that these fences over here are a bit of a health hazard. I don't want to be, too overcautious, but that definitely seemed like the right thing to do. Also, I added some skyscrapers here that I made a couple years ago. This coaster is built on the city map, so we do have some city buildings in the far distance, so I think that fits in. And then we also have some cool sight lines from the paths like this. So that was sort of my vision for why to build these paths in certain places, and that also goes for this over here. There are too many people now on the path to get a good view. There we go. Sometimes I wish that this first-person POV cam was a little bit taller than the average person. Also, I don't know why it's so crowded. It's absolutely insane. But yeah, here's the main view of the coaster walking up to the big sign that you just walk through to get to the queue line, which is over here. And it's also fun, I think, to get a quick view of what the coaster looks like from the queue. So these are some of the views that you get of the coaster when you're standing in line. And also on this side of this element, which I think are some of the best perspectives to take pictures of this coaster from. And then from this part of the queue line you can basically see the rest of the layouts. You can almost see the entire layout from the queue line. I do feel like, if you don't have an idea of how this layout goes, it's probably very confusing to watch it go around without an idea of where it's gonna go next. But yeah, that's basically the view from down in the queue. And then entering the station, you notice that the station is very simple. It is really just a rectangular block, and those triangles do a surprisingly good job at hiding just how simple this station really is, at least in terms of construction. Usually one of my first tips to anyone that I give about building stations for coasters is don't make it a rectangle, make sure you've got an interesting shape to it. But I suppose triangles do an okay job at hiding the fact that this is really just a rectangle as well. So that is the coaster. Quick overview from the sky is basically revealing what a mess of track it is. And also that, besides the track itself, it is still relatively simple. So I want to leave you guys with this because I'm working on a cinematic video with off-ride shots and a POV. So that's coming out very soon. So for now, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye!